Welcome to the Underdog Sniper Podcast. I am your host, MGCovers. This is episode 22, and we are recording this live on YouTube, so hopefully everything goes smooth. And if this is your first time listening to the podcast, greatly appreciate you taking time out of your day. We're available on all major platforms, and this will come out every Monday. Hopefully be able to do this live on YouTube every morning at 8 a.m. Monday mornings. All right, we got a lot to talk about in this podcast, some really controversial stuff here later in the podcast, but kind of give you a preview of what we're going to talk about. We'll give you an update to the Major League Baseball model. We had a career record high for units for any sport, for any model in my career. We'll talk about that. Super pumped. We're going to talk about NFL, unless you're living under in another world somewhere. NFL unders cashing like crazy. We'll talk about that. And then I want to get to finish it off talking about statistical properties and then why, if you just focus on win percentage in this business, handicapping, sports betting, you're going to probably end up losing long term. All right. So we hit a record high 50 units in Major League Baseball this week. And I've never done that in any model. 2019, I hit 30 units in NHL, which was my biggest units for any season for any sport, which was still incredible. And I'll say this: if you're new to the podcast, any sport, whether baseball, soccer, whatever it is, I basically define a successful season minimum 10 units, meaning it doesn't matter if it's UFC, if it's volleyball, if it's tennis. If you can pump out 10 units in a season for any sport, that would be considered a successful season. And I know you have to factor in ROI. I understand that, but any sport where you can pump out 10 units, you should be proud of that. And that should be like basically the introduction level, because if it's less than that, more than likely it's probably not going to be, the ROI is going to be so low on that. It's not going to be worth even wagering on it. So we crossed over 50 units in Major League Baseball year to date, which was insane. And prior to the All-Star break, I think we were at right about 25. And so I set the goal at 40 units, which would have been incredible to hit 40 units, right? Because that would have been 15 units up. And we ended up hitting 50. And what was amazing, I went back and looked at this. We went on we had an 0-6 run right after the All-Star break. I'm looking at it now. Then after that, check this out, y'all. We go on a 37-17 run, up 23 units, which was a win percentage of 69%. Now, this is important to note. That is extremely odd and unusual, meaning like the probability of you hitting 69% on a 50-game sample is way low. So obviously there was some luck involved in that, meaning like that's not normal. And that's also a point when you see guys, fraudulent handicappers promoting things like year to date, we're up, we're hitting 73%. It's just not realistic. And then because if you go overall, let me show you overall where we're at right now. And we had two tough losses last night. Arizona was down 1-6, came back, got 6 runs in the ninth, but lost an extra. They had the bases loaded, I think, in the 12th with runners on first and second, no out, and couldn't get a run over. And then we had Yankees who were up 1-0, bottom of ninth, lost that one in extras. But in any event, year to date, now we hit 50 units, and of course we lost the 2 last night, so we're back down to 48.47 units. But year to date, 178, 176 wins, 141 losses, which is 56%. So if you hear any handicapper claiming to be, 60, even 60% over a significant sample size, more than likely it's fraudulent or they're just making it up. Okay, so super excited about that. Now, let's dive over into NFL. And I'm going to read you some stats overall about NFL through the preseason, because I think this is a very good representation of what you're going to see during the regular season. We'll start out with unders. Unders are cashing 81%. I'm going to repeat that. Through the first 2 weeks of the NFL preseason, unders are cashing 81.3%. And I'm drinking coffee during this podcast as well. So they're 26-6 unders are. And to put that in realistic terms, and again, this isn't like hype. This is realistically what it is. So hypothetically, and I'm going to criticize myself here. So you have 26 wins. So that's 26 units. You have 6 losses. Let's assume 110 juice. So that's 6.6. So that's a net gain of 20.06 units. So this is a fact. If you would have wagered $1,000 on every single under for the first 2 weeks of the preseason, you'd be up $20,000, $20,600. That's insane, right? Just through the first 2 weeks. And I'm going to come back to that in a second. We'll discuss that in details. But let me give you a few more stats through the first 2 weeks of the NFL season. Underdogs are 17-14 straight up with one pick'em. And check this out, 20-11 ATS. So underdogs are covering the spread 64.5%. And one thing I have noticed with regards to line movement is what will generally happen if the team is starting their starter. You'll generally see that line movement move in favor of that team. And it's sort of overvalued because more than likely that starter is only going to play one quarter or maybe even one possession. And so that's why I think, you see so many underdogs cashing, and generally that's with the favorite. So if that team is, say, a pick 'em, sometimes that line will jump to 3, or if they're the favorite, if it's -3, sometimes it'll go to -7. And we talked about this before. If you overvalue a side, then generally the side with the value is going to be on the opposite side. So, and we'll talk about this later as well. NFL is basically an underdog sport. It's basically a money line sport disguised as a spread sport. Because the fact is, teams that cover in NFL also win outright 80% of the time. All right, so let's go back to this unders. So at this point, now, let me show you this. I tweeted last year. I posted this on Instagram yesterday. I first noticed this 10/3/2022. I actually tweeted this out. I said on October 3rd, 2022, unders are cashing 59% in the year-to-date NFL. Number will regress for sure. Books traditionally shade totals to the over, so where's the value on the under? And guess what? When that trend started, it never went back to the overs. Meaning, if you would have played all unders 2022, you'd have been profitable. If you'd have played all unders last year, I think you would have ended up with like 15 units. So obviously, right now for preseason, it's at 81%, and if you track this for the rest of the year, it's probably going to be, it's going to regress some, right? But at this point, we can define NFL unders cashing as a statistical property. And statistical property is a term I came up with to basically label a fact about that sport. So when I say statistical property, I mean a fact about that sport. Now, a fact about NFL right now is that unders are cashing. Unders are cashing. And based on what I've seen in the preseason, I think you'll see that trend continue throughout the regular season. Now, obviously, the books are going to adjust some, right? Meaning, like, you see a lot of these totals lines are like 38, 37. I think we even had an under that was like 31. But I think what you'll see, they're going to increase that some during the regular season, but I still think you're going to see a majority of these unders cashing. And what's interesting to note about, let me see if I can pull this up. Like, here's the dilemma for the books for next week, for the final preseason week. the majority of teams are going to approach this like, hey, we don't want to see anybody injured. So it's going to be a lot of, players fighting for a roster spot. Probably the majority of favorites aren't even going to play. So I think so what I'm saying is, I think you'll still see the same amount of unders cashing. It's going to be a very high percentage. And then even into the regular season. So again, one of the things that I noticed last year, and I was almost mad at myself for not taking advantage of this and playing the unders. I think my approach this year, I'm going to play unders. I might even just play all unders, because if you try to cherry pick it, you're going against that statistical property, meaning, I think you can assume, unders at this point may end up cashing, somewhere between 55 to 60% long term. So I'm probably going to play all unders on every single game, but only play 1/10 unit which is a great strategy. And what I mean by that, let's just take somebody that wagers $100, like that's your normal size wager. You wouldn't wager $100 on every single under. You could wager 1/10 unit, which would be $10. So if you got 16 games times 100, you'd basically be wagering $160 total for that week on unders. And I think that's a very conservative approach, because obviously this thing will regress at some point, which means there'll probably be a couple of weeks where obviously the overs are going to cash. But based on what I've seen, I don't think we've had a kickoff return for a touchdown yet, and probably will not the entire season. And then also, with regards to this new kickoff, it looks like teams are getting really, really, really poor starting field goal, I can't even talk, starting position. And so, most of these teams are starting each possession somewhere around the 20, 25 yard line, and making them go 80 yards to score is very difficult. And the other thing too, let me say this about with regards to unders, defenses are playing that 2-man under shell. So if you want to rush the ball for 5 yards, they're going to give you that. But the one thing that these defenses do in the NFL is they prevent you from scoring quickly. They do not want to give up a bomb. And pretty much all defenses play this way now, with a 2-man under shell. So you can run the ball, but be very difficult to, drive down the field and score a touchdown. I mean, that's what they want you to do. They want you to dink and dunk. And then if you do that, that's going to increase your probability of fumbling. That's going to increase your probability of turning the ball over, as opposed to a 5-play drive with a 60-yard bomb. So unders, until we see otherwise, are going to be the way to play. All right. Next thing I want to move on to is I want to talk about some more statistical properties as it relates to handicapping the NFL. Now, I dropped a video last night on YouTube, and some of you saw it. If not, you can watch that. It was talking about the number one mistake people make when handicapping the NFL. And the probably big mistake overall in general is people don't look at statistical properties. And again, statistical properties are facts about the sport. And in that video, the mistake that I pointed out, the majority of people take the points on underdogs in NFL, when in reality, they should play those teams on the money line. And here is the statistical fact as to why. Teams that win in the NFL also cover 80% of the time. And now we're going to say it in reverse. Teams that cover in the NFL, and think about underdogs, win outright 80% of the time. So here's probably a better way to say it. The spread in the NFL only comes into play 20% of the time. That's a fact. Okay. And just for a point of reference, let's go back and look at, let me see if I can pull up the NFL. Let's do that. I might even pull this up on the screen here, and I might do that if you're watching this live. So we got a preseason week 2. Yeah, you should be able to see this on the screen. Okay. So we'll just go through this. So we had so what we're looking for to see if that statistical property is correct, meaning if they win, if they cover, do they win outright? Denver was -6.5. They won and covered. San Francisco was +1. They won and covered. Baltimore was -2.5. They won but did not cover, so we got one loss. Houston was -1.5. They won 28-10. Chicago was -6.5. They won 27-3. Detroit was +9. They won. They covered and won, and that's my point. So you could have played Detroit on the money line, and you would have been up +320. Minnesota was +2.5. They won and covered. Jets +2. They won and covered. You see my point I'm making? Seattle and Tennessee. I'm going to go through all these. Tennessee was +1. They won and covered. Indianapolis won 21-13. They were +2. They won and covered. Buffalo was +2.5. They won 9-3. Miami was -4.5. They won and covered. The Rams were +3. They won and covered. Jacksonville was -3.5. They won and covered. Dallas was +7. They won 27-12. Philadelphia, New England from Thursday. Philadelphia was +3. They won and covered. So there were 16 preseason games in week 2. The spread only mattered in one game. That's a fact. That's a fact. So the spread only came into play one time. So for you, the sports bettor, the way you approach NFL, if you're playing money line, if you're playing dogs, you should not take the points. Because let's say you're looking at a +3.5 spread. It's +3.5. And you say, well, I think this team, I'm not sure if they win or not, but this game would be close. I think they'll cover. If you think they'll cover, then there's an 80% chance that they'll win the game outright. And in this business, you want to play into every statistical advantage you can. So if you take the spread, you're playing into a 20% probability. If you play that team on the money line, you're playing into an 80% probability. Because if you believe they're going to cover, then again, there's an 80% chance they're going to win the game outright. And in that video I made on YouTube last night, I showed a back test that I did for the 2022-23 season last year. We were up. I can pull it up. The original back test. And what I did in that back test was I played, if the spread was +2.5 or less, I played on the money line. And if it was a +1 line, I actually took that point because it's advantageous to do that, because more than likely, if you play it on the money line, the money line is going to be, probably juiced -105, maybe even -110. So it's advantageous to take the point because you're paying juice on either side. So taking the points when the line was +3 or greater, the back test was 39-27, up 9.4 units, which would be considered good. And this is how a lot of sharps handicap NFL. The majority of times they're taking the points. Now, what I did, so 9.4 units, keep that in mind. So every underdog that we could get money line odds on, dog money line, So, plus 105, plus 110, plus 210, etc. I back tested it, what it would be playing those teams on the money line. We ended up winning 10 of those on the money line and only losing 2. That means the spread that means there was only 2 times where the team that covered didn't win. And that increased our ROI, not really ROI, but units from 9.4 all the way up to plus 18.46 units gain by playing those teams on the money line. And again, it goes back to the point of majority of people do not understand statistical properties or refuse to incorporate those statistical properties into their handicapping. Because again, I'll say this again, NFL is basically a money line sport disguised as a spread sport. Because the spread only comes into play, is only factored in 20% of the time. And I just showed you that that screen earlier with the preseason. So now on the favorite side, here's what you don't want to do. And I shared this video on Instagram last night. There was a video of a very, very popular sports celebrity that talks a lot about sports betting. I don't think he's a professional. But what he said was, he was referring to last year's Super Bowl. He said, he was talking about playing San Francisco. He said if the line's -1 or -2, he said I would simply just play that on the money line for insurance. Now, a lot of people think this way, but it's not backed up statistically. Meaning there's no advantage to doing that. Why? Because if he believes that team will win, and that was his point, I could take -1 or I could take -2. I'll just pay the juice, which is, he was meaning like play him on the money line at like say -125, and he's got quote insurance, but he's playing into a 20% probability. So on the favorite side, you should never do that. You should never play the money line. Now the only situation would be if it's like -1. Meaning like if the line's -1, -110 juice, if you look at the money line, it's probably going to be the same, like maybe -110. So you would much rather play that on the money line in that scenario, if that makes sense. But all of the scenarios, you're always going to lay the points there. Because again, if you believe that team is going to win, there's an 80% chance they're going to cover. And that's just you. And if you're listening to this, and let's say you're driving in your car when you get home, or if you're home right now, all you have to do is you can just pick any season, go to week 10, 2018 season, and just do what I just did when I showed you the NFL preseason week 2. It's very easy to calculate. Very easy. So if you do that, and you have to commit to it, like you can't cherry pick it, because like I've said a million times, somebody posted this on my YouTube channel. In order for something to work, like in order to get a statistical property to work for you, you have to do it 100% of the time in order for it to work a majority of the time. Again, I'll repeat that. In order to get a statistical property to work for you, you have to apply it 100% of the time in order for it to work a majority of the time. Just like on this back test I showed you. So anytime we could play a money line dog in lieu of taking the points, we did, and profitability went from plus 9.4 units all the way up to plus 18.46 units. It's just a statistical fact. And I think what holds people back is, in this business, people focus on winning. They're trying to win. And the danger in doing that is the focus should be profitability. And let me give you another example, and we'll close this podcast out. I sound like a preacher. 60% is a good win percentage, right? We would say that like that's incredible to win 60%. However, if your money line averaged minus 150, do you know what your profit would be? Be zero. Because 60% converted into a money line is minus 150. So if you average minus 150 money lines and you hit 60%, you're breaking even. So win percentage is not the most important thing. Profitability is the most important thing. And again, that's why it's so important to understand statistical properties. What are the facts about this sport? And it's just like now with the unders. And maybe you're new to sports betting, listening to this podcast, and you say, well, it can't be that easy. Sometimes it is. Meaning like for next week preseason, I'm probably going to play all unders. And like I say, the books are in a dilemma because, I don't think they can lower these too much lower, right? Because even though in essence they don't want, quote, balanced action, I mean, I don't know where the public's going on these. I don't know if the majority of people playing the overs. I haven't looked at that. Probably should investigate that. But the facts are the unders are cashing. So rather than trying to overcomplicate this, just play the unders. And then you say, well, what happens if the overs start cashing? Well, then you make an adjustment. But for now, the statistical property of NFL unders cash at a high enough percentage to where you can be profitable simply playing all unders. So anyway, hopefully you enjoyed this podcast, and we'll start doing these every Monday, 8 a.m. Hope you guys have a great day, and we'll talk to you guys soon. Peace.